How are you? What's going on? What's new in your life?
It's really nice to be here because I feel at peace here
Hmm.
because you and I have done so much together. We've seen each other in the raw and under pressure and trying to move a mountain forward that there's not much I could tell you about my personality that you haven't already
Right. Yeah.
seen. But there's a lot of things that got me here that maybe I can share with you.
Right. Yeah. No. So definitely, it's been a roller coaster. 10 years, I would say. I think I met you like 10 years ago now. Right.
It's about that. I always equate it to my son Justice and when
Mm-hmm.
we started the first day, and that's kind of how I keep my calendar these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah. For me, it's remembering them as little kids, and then seeing them now like growing up, teenagers. It's pretty cool to see that, and it's also cool to see them still breaking even after all these years, right?
I think once a breaker, always a
Yeah,
breaker.
once a b-boy, always a b-boy, right? What's going on right now with you? I know that obviously you do a lot of different work. One of the things that I know over the years, just knowing you and seeing how you approach like your business is bringing people together. I feel like that's something that you've done for us in the breaking scene. I've seen you, now you're doing it also for the gamers, and you also have done it before even I met you. So tell me a little bit about how you guys started with sports. Like what drove you to that sport, the world of sports?
I grew up in a family that had season tickets to Madison Square Garden in New York City, the original garden.
Mm.
And my parents wouldn't take us. They actually went out with their friends and they watched the Rangers and the Knicks. So we didn't really grow up in a sport fan type atmosphere where we went to games and we were fans, but we played sports
Hmm.
and we focused on health and fitness, and my parents were really fit. So to me, it was about participating. I wasn't really interested in the business side, and I really didn't think I would end up being a sports attorney. It wasn't even on my checklist.
Right. So something just sort of happened.
When I got to college, I started working at the racetracks because it was good money,
Okay.
and I was working in the marketing department. And there was a woman there that was quite ahead of her time that figured out the marketing side of the business.
Hmm.
And I was a business marketing major. And I thought, this is a great opportunity. This person owned 3 racetracks. But I also saw how influential this owner was in the state and how people flocked to him. And politically, he could get things done. He wrote my recommendation letter for law school, and I
Hmm.
got in.
Wow.
Don't know if it was him or me.
Like a leader in the community,
In the
really
state.
involved. Yeah.
He owned 3 racetracks,
Wow.
so that's a lot of tax money
Mm-hmm.
coming in. But I didn't think about those things. The other thing that I saw was, he had a temper, and I saw how he treated people wasn't the best. So I learned what I didn't want to do as much as how his intelligence in the marketing side really brought people to the track.
Hmm.
And then my best friend in college, I went to University of Maryland, was Frank Reich. And he is now the head coach for the Colts in the NFL.
Okay.
So I think I surrounded myself with people that were going to do great things. And I realized that energy and people that are passionate and drive themselves in their focus was all I needed around me. I had a different focus. My best friend, was an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Frank was playing football. He lived with Boomer Esiason, who's a very well-known host on ESPN and NBC and so
Okay.
forth. And just watched how the agents were trying to recruit them. I also saw how people treated the players on campus, got friendly with Coach Ross, who was the football coach at the time. And we had incredible basketball teams. We had a coach, Lefty Driesell, which is famous.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I was sort of taking it in from, I really didn't care win or lose, but I was fascinated by the dynamics of how much power these people held in the university.
Right.
I would go out with my football friends. We wouldn't wait online. We never paid for a drink.
VIP.
Just the VIP type atmosphere. So I finished college in 3 years. I was somehow in a rush, not really sure. I wish I could take back that 1 year and party a little. And my last year in college, I worked at a law firm right near campus and realized that was not what I wanted to do.
Right.
Did not want to sit in a library and look up cases. So when I went to law school, I thought, oh, I'll do nonprofit. I'll do probably international law, thinking this is perfect. I'll get to travel and I'll get to do good.
Right.
So I went up to a school that was one of the best schools in Boston for nonprofit. Then I transferred back to American University my second year. And then my mom got sick. So my last 2 years or year and a half of law school was really consumed with my mom literally dying.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, she's not even going to get to see me, graduate.
Right.
So I thought, I better get going here so she kind of knows what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah.
So I took an internship job at the NFL Players Association. And after that, realized we were going on strike. I was walking picket lines. And I really got an understanding of what it was to collectively hold people together for a common cause.
Okay.
And I watched the most amazing 5 or 6 people do it.
Right. So let's go back a little bit. We'll come back to, how you got into, some of the things that we know about, which I think it's important people to know. About yourself in the NFL and all the things that you've done for other sports. Growing up, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a town called Maywood, New Jersey.
Okay.
Super small town, but surrounded by New York City, basically 8 miles away. So I grew up in a bubble. My town, downtown, I would bike down, sign my name for things. We never had money. And my mom would come in to the butcher, the baker, the little small supermarket, the cleaners. She would know everybody.
Yeah.
And everybody knew us. My mom was PTA president. My dad and mom were softball coaches. We were so intricately involved in the community. My next door neighbor ran the town newspaper. We were in the paper so much.
Yeah.
It was biased.
Right.
Mr. Rubin he would call us out, take a picture, and then make a story. My parents were involved in parades, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, art shows, you name it. And my mother was a teacher. My dad had his own business. So we had a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And then I really realized that, wow, we lived in a really small, humble house. We had a 2-family house, so we had renters upstairs. But our house was the smallest.
Yeah.
But everybody would come over to our house. Yeah. And my mom was so good at collectively figuring out when people entered the room, where to put them, how to develop, like, just looking back, she held the glue together.
Yeah.
Even if people weren't talking to each other, she would get you over it. Right. And her food was the best of the best. Yeah. So if she didn't know how to cook something, she'd go to our neighbor who lived behind us, who owned the Chinese takeout. Mm-hmm. And she would go cook with them.
Wow. Yeah.
And learn the knives work. She'd go in a restaurant. You can't do this today, but she would take the menu. Mm-hmm. I have so many menus where the chef wrote down the recipe.
Wow.
And then my mom would make it and bring it back. Or she'd bring it to the butcher. It was her way of getting people together.
Right. So you're a lot like your mother, I would say, because you do that. I know I've seen it with my own eyes, right? Especially in the breaking world, people from different areas working together. I think it's a very special trait.
Well, let me say one thing. I mean, I don't feed people like that. I probably should, but I think one thing is when you realize you have this trait, you have to remember that it can be taken away from you in a second. And you have to remain true to the trait.
Right.
Whatever your talent is. Transparent. Don't use it for abuse. And just keep it transparent. Because I believe God giveth, God taketh.
Right.
And so if you're going to have a trait, use it for the good, because there's a fine line between good and bad.
Right.
So I grew up as the third child, and I was the third child. No one paid attention to me. We rarely were 3 kids. All our pictures and our home pictures are 6 to 8 to 9 kids. My parents had 4 best friends. They all had kids, same ages, and we were inseparable. It was like the Yaya Sisterhood book, if you've ever read that. And I thought it was normal not getting new clothes and having hand-me-downs from 5 people.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have to wonder what I was wearing the next year because I would see my sister in it.
Seen it. Yeah.
But to me, it was new.
Yeah.
And working like all week long, sports, whatever, the weekend we would go into my mom's hometown about 20 minutes away, Jersey City. And my relatives basically ran the Jersey City Main Avenue, the boulevard.
Okay.
My aunt and uncle ran the stationery store back then when they would print stationery. My aunt was the president of the temple, first female. My grandmother and her brother started Statewide Savings and Loan, which was a mortgage company, and my grandmother sat on the board. Unheard of.
Yeah.
She was born in 1906. So my other aunt was head of a charity. So there was so much work and charity going on at the dinner table that the conversation was about business and about politics. My grandfather owned the Esso station, which is Exxon today, and owned candy in the store, so selling that as well, where it was like a convenience store. My other uncle owned the bike shop. So it was very hard to get away from that chatter. And then they owned buildings, and they all lived in the same apartment building. So I would go for dinner at one level. I'd go for dessert upstairs, and then I would drop down to the first level and have Cracker Jacks. And my Uncle Irv always had box of Cracker Jacks. So we ran the apartment building and nobody would yell at us because we were the children, the grandchildren, the nieces of the owners.
The owners, yeah. Right. How old were you around that time?
I would say from the time I was born till 15.
Yeah. So you basically grew up with your whole family and friends, all basically small business people, right?
My dad's side of the family had the jewelry shop, and they ran it since 1927. So when I went into New York City, I had to sweep the floor, stamp the envelopes. My mom ran the books. It was, and still is, a family affair. Yeah. But that's the conversation. And you watch, jewelry is about trust. People have to leave their most precious item with you.
Yeah.
And so I definitely learned how to build that trust with people when they're not leaving me anything, but I am doing something for them that is so meaningful to them, whether it's opening a business or helping them out of a situation. They're not sleeping at night.
Yeah.
And I rarely sleep at night. I take it on as if I'm in their shoes.
Right.
And I think that comes from watching my dad sketch pieces, take things home, my parents talking about it in the house. It was just constant.
Tell us a little bit about your dad, because I've gone to New York. I think he has Times Square as his office, right? And how did he get into like jewelry? I know you mentioned before that, he's still shaking hands for certain things, right? So building that trust over the years, how did he get into that?
So the jewelry business is an amazing business. It's so unique. It still runs with a handshake, a lot of cash, not a lot of records. And you have to be able to trust people. And at 92, my dad has to build new friends in the business because most of his friends have passed away. Yeah. So I watch my dad. He reinvents himself pretty much every year.
Yeah.
He takes on a new topic. So the pandemic, he decided, I'm going to learn how to do coins. And he just takes on this task. And so you can see how he survived through a recession, survived through gold being high or low. He just makes those shifts and figures out one step ahead. How am I going to get food on my family's plate?
Right.
So my dad grew up in New Jersey, West New York, New Jersey, tough neighborhood. And then his parents moved to a little bit less tough neighborhood. But he played basketball. And he's a tough basketball player at that age. And then when he moved out to the suburbs, he found out that that was a different type of basketball. It wasn't as contact.
Oh, right.
But for the most part, he was headed to MIT to be an engineer.
Wow.
And working with my grandfather, his dad, during the day. And then my grandfather had a heart attack at the racetrack, and my dad had to take over the business. So instead of going off to MIT, he went to Pace. That generation was just a survival kind of mode.
Right.
They had come over on Ellis Island. All of my uncles on that side were diamond setters or jewelers, and bringing over that trait. And so the most important part is both sides of my family were entrepreneurs, had their own business, really didn't answer to a boss for the most part, except themselves and customers. And secondly, I think my parents my mom being a Hungarian Jew and my dad being Armenian, they come from cultures that have had genocide. And so they're survivors. And back in the time when they came from Ellis Island, you could be not hired because you were a certain race or a
Right.
certain religion or whatever. And they just went out and opened the shingle on their own, didn't wait for someone to say no to them.
Yeah. You kind of have to do that, honestly. I mean, I talk about my family all the time as well, so like the jewelry business for you guys, for us is construction, and it's hard coming over here and like starting a business, especially a business where it's not like the traditional business that your family does. It's like totally different. I want to start breaking and turn that into a business, So there is a lot of challenges, but I think it's super awesome for you to like grow up. I can imagine you growing up and the conversations that you would have at the table with your family about business. Um, I think that for me, for example, I didn't have that growing up. So a lot of what I'm learning is like first time I hear it, first time I see it. So what are some of the things that aside from obviously being a good person and treating people with respect, right, and making sure that you're careful with your trait, like you said, some of the things that a person like myself coming to this country, what would you say is a good starting point for somebody coming to this country and wanting to start a business and not working for somebody else?
I'd say work for somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's a lot less expensive to make mistakes
Yeah.
off of someone else.
Hmm.
Learn what you don't want to do. As much as people say, this is totally what I want to do, check off things that you don't want to do. Do you want to manage people? Do you want to hire people? Do you want to fire people? These are the things that you'll have to do when you have your own business.
Yeah.
So learn from other people. I always say, be a sponge. Listen more than you talk.
Right.
I think as you age, you sometimes talk a little more because you've seen this rodeo before
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to cut to the chase faster. Even though it's for the first time for everybody else in the room, you're seeing the patterns and you see the whole super quickly. Whereas when you're younger, you should really focus on seeing patterns of behavior. Don't trust people. I often see people say, well, they sound nice or they look nice. Don't let all that deceive you. Let people build their trust with you over time. And I always say trust is made by many acts, lost by one.
Mm-hmm.
So be careful what that one act is.
And people who've been in business for a long time, of course they're nice, right? Because you kind of have to. But at the end of the day, it's not, all nice. After all, it is business. And that's hard for people to like process a lot of times, especially if you're new.
So you're going to make mistakes. And it's cheaper to make a mistake on somebody else's dime, as we say. But I think in the end, you have to test the relationship and know that it's not going to be perfect going up the ladder. There'll be some hiccups, but you have to be transparent if you want that relationship to be a long-term relationship. If I decide I don't need that person in my life or in my circle, then I just walk away. I don't have to let them know why I'm walking away. Because I never know how life circles around.
Right.
But just be cognitive that you can lessen the communication and not be in their face on a constant basis. So, for example, when we were looking for your new place, we went to a lot of places over a series of years. But there's only one place I said to you, this is good.
This is one. Yeah. I remember that. For me, every single time there's something in front of me, I have to go through it and I have to finish it. Right now, sometimes and a lot of times it doesn't work out, which I think is interesting because a lot people will see it. Oh, that person is having success, but there was a lot of times where I didn't get the building or somebody wouldn't return my calls, right? That happens more than I now that I think about it, it happens a lot actually. Honestly, so it's hard, right? But at the end of the day, if you don't give up, if you just keep going, keep trying, keep on failing really and learning, eventually it will happen, right? So it took me a long time and now I'm like seeing this new like this growth that I've never experienced before. It is scary too, right? Because now you have more responsibility, but at the same time, you're able to reach more and you can almost see the potential, right? So
Yeah,
fear kind of holds us back a lot of times.
I think that's true. I don't have fear of failing. I have fear of not trying. Just as easy as that. If I see something and I'm thinking, I see pattern, I see a hole, I think I can get this person in that pattern, be successful. Why not? I mean, you're on the bottom of the ladder.
Yeah.
Like, how far can you fall?
Right. Right. And we don't see it that way, because like I was saying, came to this country, we didn't really have much, right? So when you don't have much, you want to hold on to it. You don't want to lose it. That's all you got, right? But as you start to grow and start to, maybe make a little bit more money or have more things, right? Like you said, that ladder.
Well, it's always good to live beneath your means
Yeah.
because then the money doesn't drive you. You know, don't chase the money and it will come.
Yeah.
So I had many nights where I would cry and say, this business is not for me. They're never going to accept a woman representing NFL players. And I had really good people around me that said, no, we're not going to let you.
Yeah.
We're not, just pick yourself up, brush your knees off, and get
Keep
back
going.
in the
Yeah.
game. So I didn't have that choice. I think surrounding yourself with very successful people that are a little older than you,
Yeah.
so you can watch and learn how they handle situations and just be that sponge. That's the best.
It is. It is.
So I was very lucky. I had a very dear friend of mine who was publisher of a magazine, and I got to watch how he treated people and just his sense of humor and how he kept things in check. I had another friend who was, is general manager of several NFL teams, and just watched him have a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I don't want that stress. Even with that success, that stress is too much.
Yeah. It's a lot, right?
Takes a toll.
Yeah.
And so these are things that you pick up along the way. Even though they were both successful, what traits do you want to pull out of their lives, apply them to yours, and then have your own traits overlay it?
So more like expand what you are, take traits that are good traits or traits that inspire you or make you feel a certain type of way, apply those to what you are, and then, in other words, do that for other people as well.
Right. You got to
Right.
pay it forward.
Yeah.
So if I help someone get a job, whatever it is, it's life changing.
Yeah.
But they always say, I want to take you out to dinner or I want to get a drink. And I say, just pay it forward. That's my gift. That's the gift to me. If you can help that next person that calls you and is annoying you, just like you were.
Yeah.
If you can just take 2 minutes, it might work out okay.
Yeah. And change maybe their life too, right?
So I think it's really important to volunteer in different organizations like Habitat for Humanity or whatever your passion is, watch the people that are organizing things. How do they treat people? What's collectively the group getting together? How do they keep them on track? How do they execute the project? So go a little bit outside of your group of people, but do something good as a volunteer. And then you'll be able to be exposed.
Right.
I think that's one way. The second way is just read a lot of books, because books let you travel when you're sitting still.
Yeah.
And you can be in someone else's mind and what they're doing. I read a lot of women's books. No, that's not a surprise. Autobiographies, biographies of people like Madeleine Albright and women that have done amazing things. And I'm always underlying, like, wow, she did this. That's a great trait. Going to try to get that, how she got there. She negotiated this. This is the trick she used. And so you're not inventing the wheel.
Right. Yeah.
And don't think you are. Because you're not.
Yeah.
The wheel was
A
already
long time
invented.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, it's funny. I will say this, that out of all the things I've done in my life, the breakers and organizing them was definitely a challenge. I remember my dad saying to me, we were in New York and Mr. Freeze was coming up to the shop to meet me. And my dad said to me, this isn't like your other athletes.
Yeah.
These guys are from the street. You're going to have some street smart. And I think that stuck with me.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't the soccer women that came from the perfect world or the softball that had an organized sport already. A little bit more like the X Gamers, because the skateboarders were kind of etchy, but the breakers were way over that.
Yeah, I mean, hip hop, it's a raw culture. And at that time, that you're talking maybe what?
2013.
Right. Like the thought of breaking, being in the Olympics and all of that. I'm sure it was there, but, you know, we were just trying to organize the community.
I think people thought of it over the last 40, 50 years.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't think we came up with the concept.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I think what you find in life is timing is super important.
Yeah.
And those people that tried to move the cog in the wheel 40 years ago, they helped it get primed. So when the timing was right, we just caught that air.
Yeah.
So never think it's you.
Yeah.
It's the combination of so many things that just comes together.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's how it is for other sports as well. You know, it's not like one person all of a sudden comes up with a sport and then now you got all this money going through and all these events going on. Like, it takes a long time. So people talked about it in the 80s, paid their, you know, the way for other people, inspired other people to keep breaking, because at the end of the day, if people weren't inspiring other breakers to continue doing it, it would have ended in the 80s. But instead, it grew underground for years and years and years and years. Right now, it's, you know, over 40 years later, and finally, we're going to see it in the Olympic Games, right? So let me ask you this, because I remember the day that you came up to me, and I always, you know, I share the story sometimes with people, obviously, you know, not all the time, but I remember you coming up to me at the school and asking me about breaking. And I remember also that you basically said that you were going to, I think you said something like, I'm going to give it like a day or something like that. I want to invest like a day. I want to go look and see what's out there. And then you came back, and after that, you know, we started kind of doing different things and trying to bring people together. I think it was always the main goal, is that everybody does their own thing in the breaking scene. We all want to do our own thing. But you taught us that collectively, as a group together, one voice, you know, it's a lot more powerful than me going out there by myself.
There's a lot more pain and bumps in the road ahead.
Yeah.
So this story is not, we're in the first chapter.
Yeah. It's just the beginning.
Absolutely. I probably said something, I'll take a deep dive.
Yeah, something like that.
So a deep dive to me is doing a lot of research and watching videos, looking at competitions, looking at the audience, looking at the sponsors, how the money flows, where's the possible revenue streams. All of those things to me just lined up really square. I could see it as clear as you can see a blue sky.
Right.
That's how clear it gets for me. And there's no clouds.
Yeah. So when you did the deep dive, you saw it, the potential, right?
Right. And that's when I'm willing to come back and say, I need some of your time.
Yeah.
And time is the greatest
asset
you could, have, but it's also something I'm asking someone else of their time. And I asked you to jump in with me.
Yeah.
Because I knew I couldn't do it myself.
Yeah.
And so you walked that plank with me and we both dove off.
It was hard, right? Because growing up, I've been known as like, just B-boy, right? Like I come from that, the raw lifestyle too. And to now talk about, organizing, talk about breaking as a sport, I would get a lot of like heat for that. Like, wait a second, what's this guy talking about? Breaking is not a sport. I still get it now, but it's a little bit easier these days, right? That's to me, that's one of the, obviously, like for me, I didn't grow up, with entrepreneurs all around me, but that's one of my stories that I share with people because I remember it. And that's something that for me inspires me to do other things because of that moment where somebody actually saw it for what it was. That to me, that's one of the stories, right? So I talk about it all the time. And yeah, after that, it was like, I went on a ride. I'm sure you were in the NFL, you work with, you've seen it. But for me, that was very new. And I was scared the whole time. Like, oh no, now I got to go do this.
But remember, when I represented football players and we went out on strike, it was their ride.
Yeah.
For the first time. They came from a lot of lower
Right.
socioeconomic backgrounds. The only person in their family making money. So I've asked a lot of people to take a ride with me. My first player hired me as their agent, a woman, got ridiculed in the locker room for having a female agent. So I'm quite used to that story.
Yeah. Right.
The women's soccer players had worked for 10 years before they met me. And to all of a sudden hand that over to me and say, can you make our working conditions better? And we're willing to miss the Olympics over it. That's a powerful statement.
So how did they, all right. So here, obviously there's different groups. How do they find you? Is it just through people? Someone refers you and says, hey, I know this person, she can help you?
Right. So being the first NFL female agent, I was speaking at so many conferences and had a lot of media attention and thought, well, I'm working mostly with men. And then I started representing coaches, still men. And I spoke at the Women's Sports Foundation a few times on Title IX. And then they asked the head of the Women's Sports Foundation, we're having these issues. And she recommended me. But again, I spoke at their conferences, didn't charge them, did it for free, helping pay it forward, teaching the next generation. These are all things that come full circle if you do it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And then when I represented the women soccer players, the softball players said, well, we need help
Yeah, we need
too.
help. Yeah.
And this was all at the same time, right before the 96 Olympics. And then in 2000, I'm not even sure. Someone recommended, a friend of mine from an agency, a big agency, recommended to call me from a skateboarder that was having issues at the
Okay.
X Games. But I will say one thing, that because I worked for myself,
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of politics.
Right.
I didn't have to go run it up and say, is there a conflict if I
Mhm.
take this client on? I didn't have to go ask anyone, should you do this?
Yeah.
It was just me. And so I remember the soccer attorney that I was negotiating with came from Latham and Watkins, a really big law firm. I tend to go up against really big law firms. And so he called someone and said, well, how do you get to Ellen? Like,
Yeah.
how do you squash her? How do you get rid of her? And they said, you don't. You
Yeah.
just have to deal with her.
Wow. Yeah. So you work for yourself, and obviously, some of the people approaching you, if you could help, and you did decide on your own, you didn't have to go ask for permission, like you said, was like a perfect, like, timing, right?
Right. Because I didn't have a large firm to have to worry about staff.
Yeah.
If I take this on and fail, what does this mean? And so that flexibility, and I've gotten asked to join other agencies over the years,
Mhm.
or join a firm, or be of counsel. And I've always decided no,
Yeah. Do your own thing.
do my own thing.
Right. So let's talk about obviously now with breaking, right? And you mentioned that this was like one of the, I wouldn't say interesting, but one of the things that
Challenging.
challenging things that you've ever done. Why is that? Is it just because of, like you mentioned, the culture of breaking, or what do you think about breaking that is different from, say, the skaters, or even like softball or something like that?
It's definitely closest to the skaters, but it has so much history, and you can't disrespect that history. It's so clear and so loud that everything you do has to look towards preserving that history. Even though you're stepping forward,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be cognitive of the past.
Right.
And you don't have that so much in the other sports I worked in.
Right. So the culture is, like you said, preserving the culture, and to us, it's everything. Got to protect the culture, because that's why a lot of us continue breaking. It's not even the dance; it's the people.
Right. So you have your social community built around your very dance.
Right.
That's true of soccer and softball players too.
Mhm.
Their friends are all in the business or in their sport. But it's more. It's just deeper. I also think it's not that the breakers had less money than the soccer players or the softball players, because they were all pretty much poor.
Yeah.
But the makeup of the community was also different. Women's soccer players were mostly Caucasian, and the soccer goalie was African American. In softball, I think it was all Caucasian.
Hmm.
And so football, not the case. 80-something% were African American. Most of my players were African American. But this particular culture in breaking, it was a really big mix of Asian community and Hispanic and African American. And that was also a different dynamic for me.
Yeah, that is true. So, you got obviously involved with breaking, and you're a part of, like, a community, even though people might not know that. Everybody knows your name in the breaking scene. So, I think that it's good to have somebody like you on our side, is what I'm saying. Because not a lot of people look out for the breakers, and a lot of times, it's hard for us to ask for help. to be honest with you, because we can do it. Even though we might be think we can do it, but there's certain things that require help, especially if you're, wanting to take it to another level.
Well, I think it's important that we don't make the mistakes of the original sort of OGs. They built this dance, but they didn't have the ability or the connections to make a really great sort of revenue stream out of it. And so the next generation, we're looking to, okay, we've got this revenue stream that's
Yeah.
sort of coming in different ways, whether you're dancing at a bar mitzvah or
Right.
doing a studio or thinking about it as a trainer. But now the next step would be to own some of it, to own the IP, to own the building that you're dancing in, to have something that you can pass on that's tangible, an asset that's going to grow. And I think that's sort of my goal with this is I promised two things when I started. I promised I'd be here if anybody asked me a question, and I have been true to my word, even though I've had breakers yell at me. I gave them my opinion and my answer. And secondly, I used to think sort of on my tombstone, it would be the first female NFL agent. But now I actually think it will be, wow, she helped get breakdancing into the Olympics. Super cool. That's
Right.
that's only thing that
Yeah.
people say.
Right.
Super cool. And my son just thinks I'm following him. So everything that he does, whether it's the esports athletes and fighting for their rights, all the athletes are different, but there's some common themes through all of them.
Right. So where do you see yourself say, I mean, I asked this to everybody, by the way, and let's say 10 years from now, let's say the Olympics happens. We're beyond that. 2026, 2027. Where do you think is going to happen with breaking? But also, where do you see yourself? Obviously, you mentioned that you're always going to be there. So if someone needs has any questions, they can reach out. But where do you see breaking, and do you see a way to help not only, to this Olympics, but to the future games as well? Do you see that as a possibility there? Because I feel like they're trying us out, I feel, in many ways. But to get to the next one, I mean, what needs to happen?
We could be one and done.
Yeah. Does that happen in other sports? Like, have you seen that before? So
because there's this temporary sport that we are, that has not been around for a long time. I think this is only the second or third Summer Olympics that has this. So we don't have a lot of precedent to look at.
Okay.
But it's very political. The great thing about breaking, which I noticed from day one when I took my deep dive, was doesn't cost a lot. You don't need a special venue. It brings in a younger demographic. It's portable. There's more than 8 countries doing it. So these are checks in my mind that say the Olympics are getting expensive.
Yeah.
But we're not an expensive sport to add. And on top of that, we only need to send 2 athletes.
Yeah. Right.
And so we're not a burden on the athlete village. And so my hope is that minimalist is what sustains us in the Pan American, the World Games, and so forth. But if you said in 10 years, I would like the breaking community to have their own organization, to be putting on a professional level at a pro league, and putting money back into the community by hiring breakers to do video, to be the DJ,
Right.
to do the lighting, and so forth, and look at this next generation that are going to college, getting degrees, have a trainer that specializes, have equipment that specializes, safety equipment for your neck, your elbows. That's what I see in 10 years if we do this right.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, because the breaking community, we do that, but we're talking on another level. We make our own hats. We teach people. We have it, but like you said, get out there, have a revenue stream, not the ones we have now, because obviously it's not enough. If it was, then everybody would be, maybe doing a little bit better. But this opportunity that we have, you have to maximize everything. So whatever you're doing now, you need to learn and increase, and also bring people up. I see, the Olympics as a great opportunity, right? And I try to, in my way, talk to people about it, because there's people who they reach out to you, they reach out to me, who maybe want to start a school, but they're a little bit nervous about it. If you ever going to start a school, now is the best time, even though we have a pandemic. When I started, and I talk about this, I literally used to knock on people's doors and say, I'm a breakdancing teacher. Can you hire me? A lot of times they would just laugh or not even call back, right? So it was hard. But nowadays, you can become a coach. You can apply. I mean, I'm hiring right now, so the opportunity is there. That job exists, but it didn't exist before. And it didn't exist when you came to the school. We were just getting started, So the time now, we have less than 2 years before
2024.
Right. And not only you said it's two people, not only obviously the money, the budget to send somebody out there, but I was just thinking about this. I was watching some videos yesterday. I think there was a competition yesterday, and I realized that the level also has to be extremely high, because it's not all about the budget, and I would think, and maybe you can share a little bit about that. The USOPC, do they want to see like the pool of people be at the highest level? And do they look at other countries and say, so and so has, they compare them, and do they want to give those slots? Or how does it all work when you're talking about sending two people out? Because it's not only about having the budget, it's also about, can they go out and win?
Well, I think the U.S. is not a given to win. That's for sure. I think other countries have stepped up. But what the community is going to start to see as we get closer to 2024 is when you take those few athletes and you send them to the Olympic Training Center that has state of the art that this community has yet to see. And when you get a shoe deal where they make your shoe to fit you and you design it, these are things that up your game to a whole nother level. But in the US, you have to have your own funds to make it.
Yeah.
We're not other countries that pluck you out at 3, pay for everything. And so I think that's a struggle, because the women's soccer players, for instance, a lot of them came from families that could afford the training, the coaches, and so forth. The current community of the breakers don't have that luxury across the board. There are, but not all. And so through your school, you're starting to see people come up the next generation who do have the money to support their dream if they should get to the Olympics or the Pan American or World Games. And the other side of it is, if you can get people just to do it for fun. Remember, softball is like the highest participation of all sports because corporations have softball teams that compete against each other. So my hope is that the community stops relying on each other to get the funding, and that we expand the community So the funding comes from external people and
Right.
external resources. So we're not draining
Yeah.
ourselves to keep it up. And so when you look at the kids that are coming to your studio, that's an example of external,
Hmm.
that you're bringing a larger audience into the space.
Right. Yeah. You're right. It is happening. But I always look at it in different ways too, because, and maybe more now than I did before, where we talk about the kids that are like, for example, going to the schools, but also at the same time, breaking's always been, like you said, it's doesn't cost anything. So the kids that can't afford like school, or can't afford to go to competitions, I always feel like that part of it as well we have to bring in. But the only way for us to really support that as well is, like you said, bring external. You got to bring some money from elsewhere.
So the grants can
Right.
help you have the
Hmm.
scholarships because you were once that kid.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't forget that.
No, for sure.
And that kid's sitting on the corner begging to come into your street and say, hello, I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
And you want the opportunity to have 20 of those people. And the only way you can do that and pay your teachers and put the
Mhm.
lights on is to go out and look at grants. And I think there's a ton of grants because you're not just going after the sports specific grants, but you have the opportunity to go after the art specific
Right.
grants. And so you almost have double the buckets.
Yeah. It's really hard to find these things, I feel, for a lot of people. Like for me, people will let me know, right? But a lot of times, like, we had a person that was talking to us about grants, and Katie, she basically said there's money that's just sitting there. Nobody's applying for it because a lot of times people think it's too difficult to get it, so nobody applies for it.
I get that all the time. People will email me and say, can you share this with your community on something else? They'll
Yeah.
say, can you share this because we didn't get anybody to apply?
Wow.
I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I had a scholarship in my mom's name and I had the same issue. It was free money.
Really?
They just had to write an essay to
Hmm.
say why they wanted to go to college and what their goals
Mhm.
were. And for like 2-3 years, no one applied. I couldn't even give the money away.
Wow. Yeah,
That's crazy.
it is.
And so I actually talked to Katie and she knows she owes us something.
Yeah.
So she has not forgotten.
Well, for me, I really appreciate, like I was saying before, it's hard to find people, and like you were saying, join a board, join a nonprofit, be around people who are making these decisions, pick up on what they do, and see what makes them successful, and then apply it, whatever you think will work with your personality. But like I was saying, it's nice to have people like that, like yourself, who are out there reaching out to the breaking community and basically saying, hey, look, guys, if you need help, reach out, and being a person that we can do that, because for a long time we only really had each other.
I think it's still hard for breakers
It
to
is.
reach out to me, to
Oh,
be
really?
honest.
For you?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I think a lot of
Hmm.
times they'll call and they'll say, I know you may not have time, or
Yeah.
they'll always have a disclaimer in their message.
Hmm.
Or you don't know me, so I don't expect you to call me back.
Yeah.
Or I wrote this thesis. Can you read it? Give me your feedback. I can hear the
In
hesitation
their voice.
in their voice. And when I call them back, or if I answer my own phone, they're always like startled.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, I call everybody back.
It's just nice to have people who care about the breakers, especially now more than ever. I mean, I'm seeing the teams put together in the breaking community, professional people who are also breakers coming together for everybody. And I see that and I'm like, man, that's what's up. It makes me happy to see it.
Well, you're going to have to allow people that are like me to give yourself a hand to get you up. And it's hard because your survival has been, we're going to do it on ourselves.
Mm.
But in order to get to the next step, you have to have somebody that's been through that step.
Right.
And the only way you do that is if you allow someone that's not in your normal circles to come in and give you that helping hand.
Right.
And eventually you won't need that person. Next generation, another 5 years,
Mhm.
you won't need me. They'll have you to call.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you'll be the breaker. You don't need the outsider anymore.
Mhm. Yeah.
Although I like to think if I'm a mother of a breaker, I'm
You're
always a
in.
breaker.
You're
but
in for life. Yeah.
but that wasn't enough when we were organizing, if you remember.
Yeah.
That wasn't good enough.
Well, it was tough because the approach is totally different. Coming in sport approach, 100% sport approach, and it's almost like very dry. It's not cool. It's not hip like, for our culture. So it was very dry. But I think that over time, especially now, Olympics and then even the regular breaking scene, like people are realizing that everything can exist and there's more than enough for everybody, you know? And I think that's like something even I'm learning too, as I kind of keep growing my business and keep on like having success in one way or another. But you start to realize that no matter how successful I am, there's still plenty for everybody else.
There is. I remember helping some people that were on Dancing with the Stars. They asked me some questions on their contract. This is going back several years.
Yeah.
I remember some other people that were out in California doing some videos, and they had questions about the Screen Actors Guild. I just looked at it as, you're a breaker. Whatever you decide to take that talent is up to you.
It's up to you. Yeah, you own it. It's yours.
So for you will own these studios, but you may stop breaking at some point.
Well, I tried. I tried a few times, but it's different with breaking because it, like you said, the culture side of it. So the way I see it, I don't have to break to be a b-boy. I'll always be a b-boy because I am that inside. So the way I talk, the way I am is always b-boy all the time. Even where sometimes I go on calls with people who don't know breaking at all, but I'm still that b-boy, like no matter what. So I feel like it's that's what keeps people breaking and keeps them around, not only breaking but hip hop. Because I think a lot of times people forget that breaking isn't one element of hip hop. So just because you're not breaking does not mean you're not a part of hip hop culture, So I think that's like really for us, I mean, it's such a special thing. And now seeing the kids getting into breaking at a young age, I'm like, man, wish they had a school back in the days, But that's the way it goes.
You did have a school. It was just a different type of school.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time my son saw breaking was, we came out of FAO Schwartz in New York up on Lexington, and there were breakers. It was Christmas.
Yeah.
And they had some cardboard out. And I said, come on over and let's watch them. And I remember I gave him some money to put down into their bucket. Right. And he thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And then fast forward when we got some of the students to perform at the halftime show for the playoffs when the Wizards were
I remember
in.
that. Yeah.
Sure enough, the kids put the cardboard down, danced outside. My son put out a cup.
Yeah, I have a picture of that actually.
And what was most fascinating was there was a band playing the next section over. And so the kids were dancing to their music, and they took part of the money they earned in their cup and gave it to the band.
Wow.
That's what you want to teach.
That's what it's all about.
That's it.
That's it.
That slight moment where you could keep it or give it, that's the lesson.
Yeah, 100%. Right. And it's a beautiful thing to see, on their own, right? Not being told.
And I knew right there, no matter where my son was in any walk of life, he could put a cup out and get enough money to get home on the subway.
Yeah, that's for sure. Right. Yeah. We used to do that a lot back in the days, like for just because we didn't have any money and we realized people want to see us break. Make $100, everyone gets to eat, get some pizza or something. It was very like innocent thing, but it is beautiful to see like the kids, getting into breaking at a much younger age. And a lot of times people don't even realize that there's more kids breaking than there is adults at this point.
Yeah, I think it's
tough.
It's hard to do it as an adult to get back on the ground. I mean, that's
right.
hard. So I think at some point, breaking will have sort of a level where older people could engage, but maybe not do all the moves, but still
Right.
feel like they're part of the movement.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to do all the moves to break, and you can have your own style. That's what makes breaking so unique, is that you can have your own way of moving, and it's creative arts at the end of the day. It's not who can do the most moves that wins, right?
Absolutely.
Some of the most legendary b-boys that ever existed didn't have all those power moves. There's Frosty Freeze, for example, character, but legendary to this day. Rest in peace. Legendary to this day, never to be forgotten, and inspired people all around the world because his charisma and his character when he was dancing.
See, it's those characters that I love.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I got into it. So like, just like how your son saw it, I saw it, and I share that experience with a lot of other people. We all, like, especially the older generation who've been breaking for a long time, we all have that story of that first time we saw somebody doing like a windmill and how it blew our minds and how our life changed forever, So it's amazing. It's an amazing tool. So obviously we're talking about breaking a lot, I'm a b-boy, right? And I've seen breaking, especially in the last 10 years, really kind of change a lot. Not in terms of like the art itself, but the competitions and things just kind of started, just going up. Do you think that has a lot to do with kids getting involved? Or do you think that it was just bound to happen sooner or later?
I don't know if it's the kids. I think it's your generation. You're starting to look at something that you love to do, and now you're trying to figure out, how can I do this for a living? Because remember, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And then have that passion and just figure out how to make the next generation capture that gold ring that you had, but at the same time help sustain yourself and grow as a person. So I think it's a combination of all generations, because you have the grandparents coming and filming it and really excited about it. You have the parents spending the money. So I think it takes a village.
Yeah, right. It does. So again, I can't even believe I'm sitting here with you right now and I'm asking you questions. It's been we talk all the time about so many different things, and I learned a lot from you, first of all. And in my circle,
and I learned a lot from you.
You're one of those people in my circle that I know, and this is for the breaking community and as a whole, like it's just great to have people on our side who can support us and teach us, especially, for many of us coming from, backgrounds where we didn't have that growing up, like my family, being a professional dancer was the last thing on anybody's mind. Having a school for dance, forget about it, But in America, you can do it. In the United States, it's possible. And that's what I've learned anyways, as being here, Mexican kid, growing up dancing, changed my life. and now I get to teach people what I saw many, many years ago. It's like a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, we're, you asked me where I like to dance. I mean, my whole family loves to
Yeah.
dance. I took ballet for over a decade. I started at 3. You were supposed to start at 4,
Oh, okay.
but my cousin wouldn't go without me.
Hmm.
So they got special permission
To go.
Then
Yeah.
she dropped out
And you
and
kept
I
going.
stayed. My sister took ballet. Now she does ballroom and country dancing. My parents basically dated at dance halls. Back in the day, the JCC had dances. And I could just remember growing up, we had a turntable in our living room. It was the only big space that we had to kind of dance. We would move the little coffee table, which
Had
you
get
could
some
relate
room.
to
Yeah.
get some room.
Yeah.
And I remember my mom, who was a great dancer, and my dad, they would always ask, my mom would say, show me the new dance. Like if we
What's new?
went out to New York, like to Studio 54 or the China Club, the hot clubs back in those days, what'd you learn?
Yeah, show me.
And I would come home and show her these dances, and she would do them, and I'd say, "Oh, Mom, you're just an old fuddy duddy." And but she'd get it. She'd get it. And my dad, he's got great hands because he's a jeweler, and he's a really good lead. He can lead you out of anywhere.
Right. So it kind of was just part of your family dancing.
Oh yeah, I mean, culturally, my sister and I did Israeli dancing. We danced at Lincoln Center.
Okay.
So my grandmother was a pianist and a childhood pianist, and played at Carnegie Hall. So music, my uncle, my dad's brother, played piano. So music and art were in my family all the time. And I don't know if you know this, but Justice was playing the piano before he started breaking.
I didn't know that.
And I said he didn't want to take it anymore. And he said, okay, I'll try the guitar. So we went to a teacher. He tried the guitar. It's like, nah. He said, let's try the flute. So I got my friend's flute. No. I said, well, look, you have to do some art.
Yeah.
I didn't say sport. I said art. Yeah. You have to do some art. And we were friends with some people that knew of your studio in Tacoma Park and said, oh, you should go over to this breakdancing school. And so I literally went there because it was filling an art for my child.
Yeah. And then it just happened to be breaking, happened to be in your same city, right? Like 10 minutes away or something. Yep. Everything worked out, right? Yeah. So I always, I still remember him coming in as a kid. And then just recently, he's taller than me, growing up super fast, right? But as a teacher, and like yourself, you're also a teacher, you get to see that in your students, You teach them something, and then they move on with life. And maybe they don't keep breaking, but that always lives in them,
Yeah, I mean, I don't teach as young as you do.
Yeah.
But I see my students move on, get married, have kids, and move up in their career, make decisions whether to leave or not. Right. Yeah, adult decisions.
Yeah, yeah. So nice, right, to see like people, how you teach somebody and then they use maybe what you taught and go and do something with their lives, right?
Well, what's really neat for me is I get to work on projects with my students, my former students.
That is cool.
So
I remember that.
They launch businesses. I work with them. They call me. They say, hey, can you be part of this project? Can you be on the advisory board? So I think being a teacher is very different from when we went to school. You had a teacher and then you left. And
Yeah.
if you saw them out in the supermarket,
It's
it
like,
was
whoa.
like, whoa, they eat?
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mom was a teacher and I
Mhm.
still felt that way. But today, my students come over my house.
Yeah.
We share things, ups and downs. They know about my life. They go to my beach house. And so it's such a different type of relationship than I don't even remember half my college professors.
Hmm.
I wouldn't even, I remember one, my economics teacher, because I hated economics and I didn't do well. So
Yeah.
I remember her.
Wow. Yeah. No. So same. I don't. I remember some teachers. Like I remember my Taekwondo teacher the most because, again, total different lifestyle. Right. Came to this country. Don't even speak English. Taken to the martial arts school, and that's the first time I was able to connect with people because we're doing the same stuff. But it was to this day, some of the things he taught me, I still use them, and I teach just like him. Like if you went to, I was telling a parent earlier today, I did Taekwondo, I have a black belt. If you went to my master's class right now and you came to my class, it's the same thing. The only difference is that I teach breaking. They started laughing, because their kids were doing martial arts too. But anyways, we could sit here all day. And there's so much. I would love to have you back again, honestly, because I feel like there's just so much information that the breaking community, especially, could learn, and maybe not even that, but like people would reach out, and ask questions. I think it's a good thing. Like back in the days when we were doing the UBA days, when we were having calls and inviting like 40 people on, and we talked about sponsorships. We talked about how to make a budget. We talked about how to put an event together on a larger scale. So we were learning all these things, and I feel like that's like, even though it happens nowadays, back then it was so new for us, right? I feel like now people would maybe be more open to it.
I think you can always learn.
Yeah.
So I'm open to having those kind of meetings. I mean, we're still meeting with a
Yeah.
group of you.
Right.
You're small, but that's up to you guys on who you're
Yeah.
going to invite in. I think I'm not the one to invite
People,
people. I
right.
think it's up to you now.
Yeah.
If we meet once a month like we are with a small group, you're the ones that are going to have to say, "Hey, can I invite
Right. So
this
and
other
so. Yeah.
person in?"
Yeah.
I don't think that's my role at
Right.
this point.
I'm excited for the Olympics. I'm excited for like where the breaking community is right now. And like especially like some of the things I get to see that maybe some people might not see or even know about, I think, because the obviously the breaking business side of it is a little bit different than like the dance side of it. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens the next few months, next year or so, as like we actually get super close and that team has to be selected, if that even happens. It's up
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean,
air.
I think you should come to the World Games
Right. Alabama, right?
in Alabama in 2022 and see how it's run and get an idea of what goes into it
Yeah.
and then come back. It's in the United States, so it's a good road trip.
Right.
It's, it's Alabama. So
Yeah.
so it's a great opportunity to just go and learn. And my hope is I do get a chance to go. And I think what's most important to take away from all of this is just to find something you like, keep doing it, and just keep pivoting until you figure out the right way to do it, and know that failure is just part of that process.
Right.
And no matter what happens with the breaking community, I think for you, Antonio, what's great for me to see is that you're getting more comfortable. You don't need me to make a phone call and have people call you back. You don't need
Yeah.
me every once in a while we still
Right.
need it, but I think it's less and less. But then you're going to start taking on things that are outside of breaking. And maybe it's buying property,
Right.
maybe it's doing things like that. And so you're constantly pushing yourself and learning new things. And it's my hope that I at least know something that can help you in that process,
Right.
and that I don't become, oh, she was part of that stage,
Yeah.
that I still want to stay current and keep learning and being able to offer something to everyone.
Right. Yeah. So for me, you are, even though I'm not your student officially at the university, I still consider myself, in many ways a student because I learned a lot from you. And to be a teacher, you don't have to go to a school. Somebody can teach you a thing or two here around, along the way. And I want to keep going because people believe in me and I believe in myself. And I do believe that everybody's born to do something, even though that might sound like, corny or whatever. But I genuinely believe that everybody's born to do something, but you got to find it. And the only way to find it is to try a lot of different things until you find it. And if you don't find it, chances are you didn't look hard enough because it's there.
Right. I mean, success is failure, failure, failure. If you walk away after that 49th failure, how do you know if success wasn't 50?
Right. You never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
And so if you have the opportunity, try the 50th time.
There you go. Thank you for coming by. I would love to have you back again. The podcast is sort of like growing and I notice it. And I just would love to have you back again on a different day. And just to keep on talking about some of the things that we talked about right now, but in more detail as well, because there's so much. Like literally we could sit here all day talking, but we probably both get tired and that'll be it. So thank you again for coming by. I appreciate it. Ellen, Zavian, thank you for stopping by. All right, guys.